Welcome to The Passion Pod with your host, Chris Johnson. Thanks for joining us. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the feature presentation.
Welcome back, friends, to Studio P, aka my dining room. Today we have a guest from a small town in Wisconsin that I was introduced to via a different guest of mine, Molly Rodriguez from Eau Claire Body Care. Mm-hmm. I looked at this guest page and wow, it's kind of controversial, but I definitely side with her. Her username is Pottymouth Polly on every social media platform. So you can find her on TikTok. You can find her on Instagram. Welcome to the show, Mandy Tietz.
Thank you.
This is your first ever full-length podcast. This is sweet.
It is. I'm excited.
I'm honored. The fact that you chose to spend it with me. Thank you so much. So in your own words, who are you and what are you passionate about?
All right. So my given name is obviously Mandy. I am Pottymouth Pollyanna online, and I am a advocate for women, women's rights, abortion rights, and I've been advocating online for about 3 years now.
Yeah, and it was in what, like a year ago roughly that it started to really pop off, it seems like?
Yeah, the last year and a half. It's really, I went from kind of slow growth. It culminated around the overturning of Roe.
Sure.
When the Dobbs decision was read in June of 2022, most of my content up until that had been talking about this potential happening. I mean, ever since Trump was elected, I've been talking about this potentially happening. Yeah. So when it was leaked and then when it actually happened, a ton of my content that I'd already been calling, like, this is going to happen. I'd been saying it for months, started to get revitalized because all of a sudden people who hadn't been paying attention, who had been sort of head in the sand about it, it'll never happen. Like, that's what we've always heard our whole lives. Roe will never be overturned. It's decided law. Went, oh shit. Like we need to, what is happening? And so that really sort of propelled me into it. And then just, having certain videos that take off over time, you just get more of an audience. And then in particular on Instagram, which is really hard to grow. It was about a year ago that really started to take off. And because TikTok can be kind of challenging at times as an app, Instagram is where I really try to focus a lot of my energy because it just has a better reach to my audience.
Yeah. Well, and I just think I'm not a huge fan of corporations. I own a small business. I'm all about the little guy or girl. But Meta's not going to lose. They're just not. No. When you look at these other social media platforms that pop up, like cool Snapchat, cool TikTok. I'm not saying they don't have a space and you can't grow on them and you can't build something out of them, but Meta is going to win long term. Sure. I would put all of my money on it. Anyways, Let's get back before that to your background a little bit. So what is it that you do outside of social media?
So I spent a good chunk of my adulthood working in insurance, medical insurance. Okay. I did that for just about 16 years, and I actually just last month quit.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. Well, I'd quit last year. A year ago, I quit the 15-year job, and I was just done. Yeah. And I went to work temporarily with Human Rights Campaign, but that was always contract work. And so when offered another insurance job, I was like, I got to pay the bills. Yeah. And so I took it, and it was a nightmare. Yeah. And I realized that just the predatory nature of insurance, I couldn't do it anymore.
Soul sucking.
And so last month, and it was so funny because I quit. So I'd had COVID.
Okay.
And so I was out for the week prior, and my boss's boss demanded I have a note. I worked remotely. She just wanted me to prove I was sick.
Okay. Yeah.
Which was just insulting. I was a supervisor. I'm like, are you kidding me? Yeah. And so I got the note because I was like, yeah, okay, fine, here. And I emailed it, and I decided, I can't do this anymore. I just can't. Yeah. And so that Monday I just emailed my resignation. I get a call that afternoon from my boss who'd only been there 2 months and had had a similar experience I had which was just this terrible place to work. She had also given her resignation that day without any understanding that I had. We both quit with no notice the same day.
Wow.
And because of the same person, because you don't leave a job, you leave a boss. So we both left. So I left there, and now I'm currently interviewing with some nonprofits and trying to align my day job with my passion.
Yeah, I think it's really hard, right? If you're going to be on the internet and you're going to be talking about all these things, to then go to a job that I'm no offense to you, but people who sell insurance, you're making the world worse. That's the most crooked industry. Right. I hate it. Like it's not.
Well, and I didn't sell insurance, but
Sure.
I worked in processing claims for insurance.
Sure.
So I got to watch, when we were denying people that needed care and were denying their claims for ridiculous reasons.
Right. And it's just like these companies are just, in my opinion, it's like the biggest scam that exists. Not saying nobody should have insurance, but it's just like it's preying on people's fears. I had a similar experience. I used to work for Verizon.
Okay.
So that was my last job 10 years ago, before I opened my skateboard shop. And every day my job was to convince people to sign contracts to pay more money than they realistically had any business paying to this insanely wealthy company that doesn't pay its taxes. And I just and I was good at it, but I just hated it.
Yeah.
I couldn't even make it a year before I was like, I just can't. Like, I feel like I'm making the world worse every day, and I can't keep doing that. It's just it just crushed me. But I'm glad that you're able to get into a space where you don't have to do that anymore, and you can.
And luckily, social media has allowed me to afford a little bit of a pause, because I do get contracts with companies. I'm very particular about who I work with.
Yeah.
A lot of nonprofit work, a lot of healthcare work, like women's health access to birth control and stuff like that. And I get contracts with them. So then I make content for them, and that has been a good little side gig, if you will.
Totally. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people I know that are in that world that make way more money than anyone else I know, and it's from contracts like that.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, all the power to them. Good for them. And I make a little money off the show through different sponsors and different things. So sponsored content is part of it. I want to ask though more, because all of your content is talking about women's rights. I shouldn't say all, the vast majority of it, right? And a lot of it is talking about news in relation to it. Like, this thing happened, you'll pull it up on your page, and then you kind of discuss it and talk about it. How do you know what you even want to talk about it? Like, how do you know what subject you want to talk about, and how much research goes into it where you're confident going in? Because obviously you're putting yourself in a position to be attacked by all these ravenous dogs, and they're going to look for any holes in your logic at all. How much goes into each one of those? So
I make sure that I understand the full context of whatever I'm sharing. So I do try to do pretty thorough research. One, for example, that I'm working on right now is a video clip that came out from Idaho. A senator in Idaho is currently saying, well, we should blame 60 million abortions over X amount of years for our low workforce. And I'm like, so you're telling me you're going to tell a woman she can't have an abortion because we might need a Taco Bell worker in 15 years? What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. Right. But it's making our point. They don't care about life. They care about having broodmares to provide lives for cheap labor and continue capitalism. Yeah. So when I see footage, or if I see an article that catches my attention, that I know will impact real people, I always try to see if there is an angle I can take that I think, where I try to take things that might be too complicated or too confusing for an average person who doesn't really understand what's happening, and I try to simplify it and make it understandable. Sure. Because I am an everyday person. I'm reading these things sometimes for the first time. I've never thought I'd be reading actual laws and bills in my life, and I've spent 3 years doing it now. Yeah. Being able to break those laws down, those things that they wouldn't even know where to look. Right. And explain to them what they mean, so that people can take action or hopefully vote in their best interest. Right. Because too often we don't. And that's how we ended up where we are now. Oh, yeah, totally. I think everyone in this country not everybody in this country knows, but most people are well aware that as far as registered voters, Democrats outweigh significantly. They just don't go. They don't go. And there's a lot of reasons for it. It's not just laziness. There's a ton of reasons. I went to go vote in one of the last elections anyways, and I had moved. I had bought this house, right? So I go and I wait an hour in line to vote, get to the front of the line, and they wouldn't let me vote because my driver's license address hadn't changed. I didn't change it. And I was like, but my license doesn't expire for another however many years. Yeah. I'm not going to go pay to get a new license just because I bought a different house. And they're like, well, you're going to have to go back to get this thing, whatever. Yeah. I was like, well, dude, I'm an hour in. I don't have, I have to get to, I was at my shop, but I was like, I have to get to my store. I do not have time to go do this anymore. Right. And that was just a very obvious example of, well, young people move. Yeah. What person when they're age 20 lives in that location for the next 8 years? Right. Nobody. You know what I mean? Everyone's moving around. And that is what, and I tend to, don't get me wrong, Democrats are flawed. Oh, totally. But that is what Republicans want.
Yeah.
That is their agenda, to make it harder to vote. In what should be the one thing we all agree on, which is everyone should make it easier to vote. They're determined to make it harder, and especially for those 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
Because Gen Z is turning up and turning out, and they are changing the tide. And Republicans are terrified of Gen Z. So like when we had the Supreme Court election last April.
Yeah. Okay.
Gen Z is the reason Janet Protasiewicz won. Like, Gen Z turned up, and they stayed in line. Some of the lines were insane to vote for her. And immediately we saw people like Scott Walker and Ron Johnson come out being like, well, we have to limit these college campus voting spots. And they are literally trying to make it harder for everyone to vote. And one of those things is the address, and making sure you're registered under the right address so that when you get there, you don't get turned away.
Right.
And we saw it in the midterm elections. We'll see it in 2024 if people aren't aware. Like, hey, check your registration.
Right.
Because if it's not correct, you will be turned away. And there's nothing more disenfranchising than saying you don't get a voice, you don't get a vote. Like, that shouldn't happen. And,
I agree.
And that is why Republicans, besides our terribly gerrymandered maps, they have a supermajority in a state that leans blue.
Right. Well, especially, even, I guess I'm limited. I've traveled a lot, but I'm limited to the people that I'm around all the time. And Eau Claire is extremely blue. But seriously, you even go outside, and I'm not trying to knock any of these small towns, because I love all of Wisconsin. It's dope. But just like, as far as like the political lean, I went to Menominee, which is like just a small town. It's kind of not technically a suburb, but it's close by. Yeah. I went there during the pandemic, and I remember going into a Walmart, and at the time, because it was like right in the middle of it, when it was really serious. I was always serious, but everyone was wearing a mask. You're required to wear a mask everywhere. Yeah. In Eau Claire, it's that everyone just kind of did it.
Yeah.
But I remember walking in there, and the employee like trying to hand the free mask, and a dude like just putting his hand in her face and just said, "Fuck that." Walked right past her, and I just was like in disbelief. Yeah. It's like, I can't but this is 15 miles from where I live.
Yeah.
How is this possible?
And these will be the same people who will say they'll look at me and go, "Oh, you're so pro-choice. What about vaccines? What about masks?" I'm like, that pregnancy's not contagious, right? Like, COVID's contagious. And as someone who had it terribly bad, and actually that leads really, really well into what is my sort of online origin story, if you want to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when COVID was pretty bad.
Like 2020?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had, right before the election, I had, been begging my parents, please don't leave. Please don't go out. My dad was a paraplegic, although in top health. He just had been paralyzed in a car accident many years before.
Okay.
And so I was like, please don't be out and about. We don't know how this is affecting people. We just keep hearing scary stories.
Right.
And it was October, and I had never really been outspoken about politics. I hadn't been making content really at that point.
Yeah. I
was just talking about how important it was that Trump not be reelected.
Right.
And my dad, who was 69, had never voted. And one day my mom calls and she's like, "Your dad wants to know how to register to vote."
Wow.
And I'm like, what? Like, I'd kind of given up. He was almost 70 years old. I was like, and so I helped him get registered online, get his absentee ballot. He was so excited. My mom called, because of course my mom always would call, and then you'd hear him in the background. He'd be like, "Tell her I voted. Tell her to check if they got it." Sure. And so I was like, "Okay, Dad, I'll check." And sure enough, they'd gotten his ballot. And then we all remember, at least I do, like it was yesterday, the 2020 election night. Everybody's on pins and needles. Like, we cannot have another Trump presidency. Yeah. But I knew Wisconsin was going to look red until they did the mail-in ballots. And because of COVID, there were a lot of mail-in ballots.
Yeah.
So I was waiting. Yeah, I knew that morning it was going to look a little like maybe leaning Trump, but it would rebound.
Yeah.
I get a call at 10 in the morning the day after the election, and I think it's my mom freaking out, because she does. And I answer, and all I hear is, "Your dad won't wake up. I need you to come home."
Oh.
And I'm like, what? So I drive the hour from New Auburn to Oliva, and he's already been airlifted to Rochester. I get a call from Rochester because it turns out I'm medical power of attorney, which I didn't know.
Sure.
And they're basically like, "Your dad's had a massive stroke. What do you want us to do? Here's your options." So we drove the 3 hours there. my mom is the only one because this is when COVID protocol was starting lockdowns, but Minnesota hadn't locked it all down yet. So they could still allow one family member in.
Sure.
So my mom goes in. I'm like kind of just walking around down in that area. I get a call. She goes, well, we can, and we drove separate because my mom seemed to have a cold. And I just thought, let's drive separate.
Yeah.
She's like, we might as well go. We have to go. I can't see him. Your dad has COVID. I was like, are you kidding me? I actually was in front of a KFC and I yelled into the unit, like I yelled in the sky, are you fucking serious?
Like it wasn't a stroke?
Like it was a stroke, but he also had COVID.
Okay.
And what we found later, COVID was leading to a lot of strokes.
Sure.
And so we had to then decide that week, basically he was not going to be communicative, not going to have physical ability unless maybe after years. My dad was almost 70, so years of therapy. And we knew when my dad had his accident years before, if that ever came to that, he wouldn't want to exist inside himself and not be able to communicate. So that Friday, they let me and some family members in to say goodbye, and we had to be in all the PPE, and we took him off life support at that point. All that to say that at that moment, I realized that the last thing my dad gave me was his voice when he voted. And that was all just because of me existing in his ether. Me just being there convinced him how important it was. And so what I often say is his last gift to me was his voice, and I've only gotten louder since then.
Wow. That's powerful. I mean, a lot of times it takes something major in your life to have you like look at it, because we get in this like tunnel vision of just kind of one step in front of the other and it could be 20 years of doing that, right? Selling insurance, or not selling insurance, but working for insurance. Where all of a sudden you can look back and go, I didn't necessarily intend to be here at all. And how did all these years pass? And I'm right here. What happened for me was much younger. My dad had a really bad heart attack. He was airlifted and he ended up having a heart transplant. He was in the ICU for a long time. And my parents, that happened when my mom divorced him. It without going a huge thing, I had to serve my dad his divorce papers in the ICU while he's waiting for a heart transplant.
Oh my gosh.
It's complicated. It was a really, really hard time. But it was during that I remember my parents always talked about the next chapter of life. They always like look forward to the next chapter of it, right? Like, oh, well, when you kids are done playing sports, we'll be able to do this. We'll be, and they were set up to retire at like 56. This was before Scott Walker, because my mom was a teacher and my dad was a DNR worker. So that had its own problem. But they were like ready to retire and do whatever they wanted the rest of their life. And then boom, in one day, everything's gone. My dad like was lucky that he lived at all. Yeah. But then also like, now you're going through a divorce and everything. Like, can you keep the house? Like both people now have to work. It just like, it changed everything. And it made me kind of think on where I was at in my life. And my daughter was 1 year old, or almost one. And I was thinking like, well, if I died tomorrow, like if this happened to me, would I feel good about like what I left behind for my kids? Like, no. And I didn't think I was like particularly greasy or anything like that, but it's just like, I was doing the thing everyone else does. You're supposed to make a solid living for yourself. So I was climbing the corporate ladder in that kind of way. And that's all those are what my goals were at that time, was financial stability. It wasn't leaving a positive impact.
Right.
And it was after that's when I decided I needed to do something I cared about. And that's when I opened my skateboard shop. So that's where like all of my stuff started, which April will be 10 years since I opened that. And it's still there downtown.
Yeah.
Everyone thought I was 23 at the time. Like, this isn't going to work. Here we are.
See, when my twins were born, I had what was called postpartum cardiomyopathy. So within a few days of them being born, they were taken early because they said I was preeclamptic. And then within a few days, my health quickly deteriorated. Yeah. I was in heart failure. I had 19% function of my heart when admitted.
Whoa.
The chance of me surviving was like 60-40. I mean, it was like one of those things where there was a really significant chance I wasn't going to survive it. And I would have thought that would have been it for me. But at that point, when you have two babies and a 3-year-old, it's like, no, I still just have to work. I have to do it. But then after my dad, the thing my boss kept saying, and I loved her. She was a wonderful woman. She's the reason I was there so long. She kept saying, I need the old Mandy back. Only months after my dad passed, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, which she beat, but that was a lot.
Yeah.
And my daughter with an eating disorder, which we've worked through, but that was a lot. And hearing, I need the old Mandy. And I'm like, the old Mandy had her dad. The old Mandy didn't just go through hell with her mom or is trying to help her daughter survive. Like, that person doesn't exist anymore.
Sure.
And I think that was the beginning of the end for me in that job, because I'm like, it's not that I don't appreciate it. It's that my heart's not in it.
Right.
And to ask me to be a person that I can never be again. I can't be the person who had her dad.
Yeah.
I can't be that person. My dad and I had not a great relationship as that when I was a kid, but a wonderful relationship as an adult. And I miss him every day. And I'm like, to ask me to be the person I was is an impossible ask.
Right.
And I think that was a big, and she knew it too. And my boss knew it. And so I've just been kind of figuring it out since. I'm like, I feel kind of old to be figuring out my life. But to your point, waiting for the next chapter may never come.
Totally.
And so if there was ever a time now, and I think we see that a lot since COVID.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot, like the great, resignation and all the things you hear about. Like,
right.
People are like, it's not worth it. And now corporations and companies and senators out of Idaho are like, oh shit, we don't have workforce.
Yeah.
Force women to have babies. Then we'll have a workforce. What?
Yeah.
Are you nuts?
Yeah.
But they are. That's literally how they're thinking.
Oh, totally.
Because it comes down to money.
But it's hard. Like, the imposter syndrome is there. Even if you feel this calling of you want to make a difference and you see like, I could potentially build a platform. You don't have a platform yet. You don't have a degree specifically in that. You don't work for a party. There's nothing backing you to say that you should be a resource for people to listen to at that point in time. How did you have the confidence to put that out there and feel... Because like I said, you're kind of like putting yourself out there to the wolves, even just to like when you don't have a platform, right? Look at your Facebook, which I don't even use Facebook, but whatever, like Facebook, Instagram, whatever. A lot of the people that you follow and people that follow you, they don't follow you because of your political beliefs. Not usually.
Oh, no, I mean, lots of trolls.
Right, exactly. But especially early on,
right.
It's like family members and stuff, where you go to Christmas and you're like, I'm not going to talk about this thing because I know they disagree and I don't respect that part of, but I let it go because that's not the place. However, when you start doing it on something like social media, especially at the beginning, everyone's going to be looking at you like, well, who are you to say, Did you struggle with that, dealing with like relationships outside of people that were just on the internet, but like actual friends, family, people you knew?
We were also isolated during COVID, so that kind of helped because there was such limited interaction when I first started. So it wasn't like I had a lot of people like, what is this thing you're doing, right? By the time we saw each other, I already established I was doing it. But I've had friendships where it's clear that they don't agree with me. And I've even had some that I've convinced otherwise, where I've shown them that maybe this doesn't impact you directly because you've had a hysterectomy or you're not having kids or whatever. But I've shown them how important it is to be your own voice. I mean, I have so many female friends that still vote the way their husbands vote.
Yeah.
And I have to be careful because I don't want to alienate anyone, because that is the quickest way to turn someone against you. But the reason I do it is to speak to those women who feel like I did, but were scared to speak up or can't speak up, or for whatever reason, don't speak up. There's a lot of dynamics where it's not safe for women to speak out in their homes.
Or anywhere.
Yeah. I mean, it's not safe for me sometimes.
Exactly.
But I keep doing it. Maybe I'm reckless. Maybe I'm an idiot. But I just feel like this is, I've said before, I'd give it all up if Roe could be codified. I'd give it all up if women could be considered equal in this country. We could get the Equal Rights Amendment passed for women so that women on paper as well as just in reality are equal. Will I see it in my lifetime? I don't know, but I'm not going to give up. Like, it's a hill I've decided to die on, whether I initially planned that or not. I mean, I didn't join TikTok to have a platform.
Sure.
I had never planned on it.
Yeah.
My dad dying became a story I needed to tell because he had never voted. And I thought it was really important to see that people can change.
Yeah.
And I posted that. That was one of my first semi-viral videos.
Sure.
I posted that on Inauguration Day in 2021. And it really solidified me in political talk, which sometimes I wish I hadn't, because that is a hell of an area to be.
There's a lot that comes with it.
And there's a lot of attempted to silence us, even from the app.
Yeah.
But I posted that. It was also the first time I got to experience just how ugly the world can be. The amount of people who said it was good my dad had died. The amount of people who said, see, dead Democrats voted. I'm like, he didn't die until days after the election. It was a legal vote. What is wrong with you?
Right.
Or, well, he died because he voted that way. Like, people were horrible.
Sure.
And back then, I was new, so it hurt more.
Right.
It bothered me more. Now I'd take it to task. Now I'd make a video and call these people out. But that was what kind of solidified me, and there was something really empowering about it. And that's when I started getting messages from women, white women in particular, because that is who I need to get through to.
Yeah.
Saying, it's so refreshing hearing you say the things I can't say.
Right.
Hearing you share the things, explaining things in ways I didn't understand. I never thought about how, this is the big one, I never thought about how banning abortion would affect wanted pregnancies.
Sure.
And it affects all pregnancies.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is such a terrible thing for anyone who wants to have a child, or victims, or someone who really can't, because we don't have the societal setup to support people,
of course, yeah.
after they give birth. That's why we say it's pro-forced birth. It's not pro-life, because after born, you're on your own.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they want to save the life until they have to be responsible for the life.
Yeah.
And then,
which is, I don't know how much time we have.
No, you're good.
Which is really highlighted in Texas right now,
right.
where they forced a woman, Kate Cox, to go out of state and get her abortion care.
Yeah.
Because they would not, she should have qualified for the exception, which exceptions are bullshit. We've said it all along, and this just proved it.
Yeah.
Because the doctors were saying this was not only a threat to her life, but absolutely could cause her to be infertile. And she wanted more kids, and this pregnancy wasn't viable. That fetus wasn't going to survive. It was going
Right.
to suffer and pass either before or after, right after being born. And they said, no, we can't prove that. So she can't get an abortion. So she had to go out of state. At the same time, there is a woman who was a prison guard for a state prison in Texas, who was having pains and complications with her pregnancy and wasn't allowed to take a break. She was on the clock. They wouldn't let her take a break. She ended up having a stillbirth. She sued the state. For Kate Cox, it was that fetus has rights. For this woman that was a prison guard, the fetus doesn't have rights. From the same state.
yeah.
Like, they talk out of their ass all the time. They want it both ways. You can't have it both ways.
Right.
You can't say we care about life, but not your life, because we'd have to pay for that.
Right. Yeah. It's a hard thing, making laws, which we're going to get back to it after this song break. But it's a really hard thing because there isn't a right answer that covers everybody. There's exceptions no matter what. So as a politician, you have to try to do what's right ethically and what you think is best overall. And then you can take some case-by-case situations that could be exceptions. But it's really difficult to figure out, so what should it be? It certainly shouldn't be an outright ban on it. And like I said, we'll get to that after the song break. But trying to figure out when, I think, is a huge difference, where when you're on both sides of the extremes, trying to find a middle ground seems impossible as you continue to get further and further out. I want to hear in your own words, because this is a big, misconception with a lot of people. Seems like there's a lot of men that think that feminists are just women haters, right? And sometimes it's a very intense thing, so I think people just get defensive. But in your own words, what is a feminist? What is feminism?
So for me, feminism is just about protecting women and giving women the same accesses that men have had forever. Making sure that women are protected in ways, like there are no laws dictating what a man can do with his body or can't do.
Right.
That shouldn't exist for women either. The big one I'll get from men all the time is, well, men have it worse. We have the draft. First of all, bro,
Not in our lifetime.
you haven't been there hasn't been a draft since 1973. You are the closest you're coming to being drafted is like playing Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty. That's what it is. Like, you're not getting drafted. Secondly, the actual stance from feminists and from the feminist movement is that there should be no draft. No one should be drafted.
Yeah.
But they love to throw that at me like, oh, well, you don't get drafted. It's the same energy as, well, if you want to be equal, then we can hit women. No. You can't hit anyone.
No one can hit each other.
It's assault.
Yeah.
But that's what they go to. These are the men that usually get the most mad at me. You're a feminist.
Yeah.
To me, being a feminist is fighting for women to have access and equal access and be respected in the workplace, have equal pay, equal opportunities. They'll say these things are fallacies, they're not real, but we see in action that they are every day.
Yeah.
Women having access to jobs that are still considered sort of man's work, because there are plenty of women who want to do it. Not all women want to do it, but not all men want to do it. The same men who are screaming this literally like are accountants, and then they get really mad that, well, go build a house. You go build a house. None of us are doing that. What are you talking about? And for me, it's about just ensuring that my daughter, my friends, other girls, other those who identify, the trans community, the queer community, have the same rights and privileges that we see, especially white men, have all the time.
Yeah.
But it also is just about making sure that women are protected, because, they talk about the draft, for example. We don't want anyone to be drafted.
Right.
But hey, you know what? If that's what it comes to, fine, we'll all be drafted. But maybe we should look at this from a different point of view. We come at this from a different angle.
It's hard because like what we really want, right, or what everyone should want, realistically, is just an equal footing world, which is not how it is. Probably will never be that way. Not specifically talking about men versus women, just like in general, financial status, where you're from, whatever. There's a million things that go into the fact that it's not a even playing field for everybody. And I have 2 daughters. I have a 7 and 10-year-old.
Okay.
So this subject matters to me as well. About I want them to believe that they can do anything. Because my parents, one thing, and my parents were great, but the one thing I will definitely give them is they told me from the beginning, as early as I can remember, that, Chris, you are really smart and capable of doing anything that you want in the world. Anything. There's nothing off the table for you. And I believe that. And that's part of why I'm able to go, oh, I want to do this radio show. Yeah, why not? I'll figure it out. I'll do this. Or like, oh, I want to open a skateboard shop. Oh, okay, I'll do this. But not everybody is like bred like that, being told not only from their parents, but from the outside world, that you're capable of doing anything. White males, that's what we have. We go into it with the assumption of, well, if anyone can do it, we can do it.
Yeah.
Because we're top of the food chain or whatever. But those same opportunities aren't given. So why do you think women are paid less? Because they're not given the same opportunities from the beginning.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or black people or whatever, queer people, whatever. There's all these different barriers in place. It's not just a work harder and you'll achieve the same.
Right.
We're not starting from the same playing point.
Right.
So we have to figure out, how do we level the playing field? But
and
it's
just
hard
the
to do.
discrimination that will happen to women, especially, or minority groups, that doesn't happen to white men. Like, even just the fact that women can still, oddly enough, there are ways, as long as the company doesn't indicate the reason they're firing you is that you're pregnant.
Yeah.
Many women are fired for being pregnant. They can't do the job. We don't have protections for our jobs. There's this expectation that we should, there's definitely this uprising of this new like traditional families, and we need to have the nuclear family, and we need to have the wife at home, and like there are women legislators like Marjorie Taylor Greene and
mind-blowing.
Yeah, that are legislating themselves out of a job.
Totally.
I'm like, do you not understand? Why don't you just go home and make dinner then? Let other women legislate, because you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And I want to see more women in power. I want to see more women making decisions. I want to see more women being engaged in, all branches of the government. We have it's so lopsided, and it probably will be for my whole lifetime. But it takes 3 times, if not more, the work for a woman to succeed in those fields than it does a white man.
Because people don't take them seriously in the same way. They assume that they're not capable without even giving them a chance.
My favorite is women are too emotional. I'm like, who's shooting up schools? Who's starting wars? Who's getting arrested for violent acts? That majority of the time, that's not women.
Yeah.
Women are far more capable, and to men's point, and I'm gonna get the men like maybe mad at, maybe not. This is a plus for men, or not a plus. This is sympathy for this for men.
Sure.
You're not taught, majority wise, not all men. I keep saying that because I hear it's not all men. I know it's not, guys. I know. I don't hate all men. I just hate men that are misogynists, and I don't even hate them. I just wish they were different. But men are not taught in the same way that women are to handle our emotions. They're not taught to speak out or to articulate their emotions. They're allowed to be aggressive. They're allowed to be angry. They say women are more emotional as though anger isn't an emotion.
Right. Yeah.
And unfortunately, because of that, as they become men, they become more dangerous because they don't know how to deal with their emotions. And women are taught to always deal with their emotions, and therefore somehow we're more emotional. No, we just are able to express our emotions in more ways than anger.
Yeah.
And so this idea that women are more emotional, no, we're just more in tune with it. But it's a lot easier for men who are angry and don't think feminists have a place, and to just be like, you're just too emotional. I'm expressing things. Like,
right.
For example, I made some content this week about the Golden Globes and how Taylor Swift didn't appreciate the joke that was made.
I didn't think it was a good joke.
It was a terrible joke. And
Yeah.
it also went to center her boyfriend. It just goes to show
Right.
that no matter what a woman accomplishes, it is not given the same credit unless there is a man involved.
And she's got to make 10 times as much
Oh
and has
my
had
God.
100 times the
Her
impact.
cat is worth more than that guy.
Yeah, and I've
it
never
was-
heard anything bad about him, but he's just a football player.
Yeah. Oh no, I meant against the comic.
Yeah, sure.
But the football player, but they're centering it around she's a boyfriend.
Right.
So they make an NFL joke. She didn't think it was funny. She had no reaction. If anything, she just looked unamused.
Right.
Which, if a man does that, wouldn't have made the news. Would have been fine. But because she just looked unamused, suddenly, well, she could have been more gracious. She should have smiled. She didn't need to overreact that way.
Right.
And as Taylor Swift herself has said, men are allowed to react. Women can only overreact. Because no matter what we do, it's considered an overreaction.
Right.
And I'm like, she literally didn't do anything. But I do remember last year when Will Smith didn't like a joke, and he was probably justified in it. But that being said, he gets up, smacks the hell out of Chris Rock. And that was like, it was news for a day. But nobody was like criticizing him. And I mean, there was some criticism, but it quickly shifted to like support. It was very weird.
Right.
It definitely wasn't what Taylor Swift is experiencing
Right.
when she literally didn't do anything.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's hard though, right? Like if I ask you the question, what do we need to do to be able to get things to be in an even playing field? How can you even really answer? It's difficult, right? Because there's a
It's so
million
complex,
things you need
yeah.
to do. And honestly, even if you did try to give everything equal, because they're not starting from the same equal, it still wouldn't be equal anyways. That's
Right.
why you need to have, more scholarships for college as an example
Yeah.
that are geared towards that. You need to give these different little legs up because they're starting from it's not because they're less capable.
No.
It's because they're starting from so far
Right.
behind.
Back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you look at places like Michigan who have like a predominantly female legislature now.
Yeah.
Boy, are the men, the like old men, the like lightly used corpses that they are, like so mad. One of them called, and I hope this isn't going too far, but one of them called one of the women a cunt.
Yeah.
And he was censured, and then he eventually was kicked out. And one of the most, I can't think of her name, my brain's gonna break. I did a video on it and it went viral because it was just me being like, my kryptonite is powerful women. And people are like, kryptonite kills you. I'm like, no, it makes you weak. I'm like, I'm weak for powerful women. Like, she just basically was like, we're not doing this. We're not doing this shit anymore. The days of the He-Man, no women hating, the woman hating He-Man club or whatever it was are done.
Yeah.
We're here to do a job. And she was like, it was a killer speech. But it was a good example there, these women, and they're doing so much good for all people, not
Right.
just women. They're doing good for all. They're getting rid of like ridiculous zombie laws that have no place, but could come back to life if the right people are in power. They're making sure that kids have free school lunches when we have umpteen states with Republican legislatures who are like, no, we're not going to give them free lunches.
Right.
And you're like, that's like the basic, like give kids, stop punishing kids. We have people in the, we have like Matt Gaetz, he suggested that kids have to work for their lunches.
Only some kids.
Kids who have a deficit or kids who don't have any money should have to do like a work program to get their lunches at school because their parents can't afford to pay for their lunches. And I'm just like, do you hear yourself? But you're the party of pro-life?
Yeah.
What? But it's really complex, but we are seeing things like in Michigan. And I think St. Paul City Council might have just been all women.
Sure.
We have a progressive leaning Supreme Court here in Wisconsin of 4 women. We're showing that, women are capable of thinking out, because we are forced to for so long to
Right.
think about more than ourselves, because
Sure.
we have been so indoctrinated to believe that everyone else matters before us.
Right.
We're actually really good at leading because we can think outside our own selves.
Sure. Yeah.
But it is a really complex thing to get us. The idea of getting us even is really hard. We need to start with things like the Equal Rights Amendment, where women are legally protected equally under the law as men, and things like that. So we can't be discriminated against. But unfortunately, until we have the right people in power, that's not going to happen.
I think we're in a unique space now, though. Even 15 years ago, if you wanted to speak on an issue and get it to a lot of people, you had to be in politics, or you had to work for a news station or something like that to get in front, right? You had to be Anderson Cooper or whatever.
Right.
Now with the internet, unfortunately, you get a lot of misinformation as well, which sucks, because then people point to one thing you may have said wrong or out of context to try to make you everything else you say not correct. But it gives people that if they care about it enough, they can speak what their actual opinion is. That isn't paid by somebody, that doesn't have to align with the party's views or whatever. And then you can put pressure on these things. Because the only reason that
doesn't like TikTok.
Yeah.
It really is.
Oh, well, I mean, if you look even at the Obama election, right? That was the first major election where it was whoa, social media has a huge power on this. And it's only becoming more and more and more. When you talk about the most influential people in the world, some of the top people, they're not politicians. They don't own anything. They're just huge on social media.
Yep.
Because the social media, that's a TV channel to however many people tune into that. And there's certain people that get more people tuning in than they do into some of these major TV stations. So, it's just kind of changing that power, which when you're in a position to have influence like that, it comes along with a lot of pressure, because the more people paying attention, the more you're like, I can't mess this up for these people.
Right.
How do you handle the pressure with that?
I try to be as factual as I can.
Yeah.
I can get very emotional. I can get very heated. But I lead with the facts, and I make sure that I'm very clear that, if it's something where it takes an expert, I'll be clear, to be honest. I'll be like, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm telling you, this is how it plays out in my mind.
But the news people speaking on it aren't experts either.
They're not.
To be fair.
And most of those news places like Fox are entertainment. They're not.
Totally.
They're not news.
Right.
And so for me, we're more factual often than any of those news places, because we, like you said, we don't have money backing us to take one side or the other.
Right.
So I can speak on an issue and have that freedom to be like, well, this is what I'm calling bullshit on this. Like, what?
Yeah.
So for me, the pressure, I have to not think about it a lot. I take it one story at a time. And I constantly think about the people that I'm speaking on behalf of.
Right.
And I try to be respectful. I am still, in terms of food chain, I'm pretty far up there as a white woman. I recognize that comes with privilege in and of itself. So I try to know my place. I try to recognize that I'm speaking, trying to get through to the way too high a portion of white women that vote Republican. But while also being respectful of other minority groups, there are things that I just have rules for myself. If it's not something that I feel comfortable posting, or if I post it and I'm having any sort of hesitation, I take it down.
Yeah.
Or if somebody calls out something I did and it's unfactual, it comes down. There are other people who will lean into it and they'll just leave it, and they'll leave the misinformation out there. They don't care because of clicks, likes, and views.
Yeah.
I take it down. I won't compromise my own credibility and my own sense of self for likes, clicks, and views.
Which is hard, because that's how it's the reward system. You know what I mean? That's why I see it all the time. And this is a problem that I have, and I'll probably receive some hate this or whatever, but my kids are young, and I'm conflicted when I look at, I don't want to call it self-love, but women owning their sexuality and posting, whatever they want to wear and whatever. My only confliction in my mind is the social media, it gives them more by doing that. So it's trying to train people to think that this is the best option because this is where you get the most reward. This is where you'll get the most likes. I don't want my kids to think they have to do that, though, to be successful. If they want to do that, it's their own body. They do what they want. But I don't, it's setting the example that, and it's not just the women doing it, but it's more so the platform itself and everything that is rewarding that, where it's it's telling a lot of young women that is what you need to do in order to be successful.
Right.
And so it's hard for me because I want to support it, Because I think you know what I mean? But you got to look when you're in a position of influence too, like, so what message are you trying to send? And there's so much gray area. There's so much, it's cloudy.
Well, and I think that comes into how you're raising your kids.
Right.
And having those open conversations. Like, what is your motivation for this? Are you doing this because it's just popular? Are you doing this because it's making you feel confident? Because you're proud of the work you did in the gym? Because you feel attractive and you feel pretty and you want to show it?
Yeah.
All of those reasons are valid, but what is your reason? And then just, having those conversations, especially as a parent with your kids, to be like, you know what, they're going to fail. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to wish they didn't do things, because we all did. Luckily for us, or at least for me, you're probably a lot younger than me, but social media wasn't a thing until I was out of college. So like a lot of my stuff,
getting into college.
A lot of my stuff wasn't documented. So that's good for me.
Sure.
But for me, I have a whole platform where very rarely is it a thirst trap or am I being sexy? Because it's just not what my platform was. But every once in a while, I'll throw a picture out there, and sure enough, that's when the troll men will come out with their like, oh, just, you gotta show your body. It's like, dude, it's not that I'm showing my body. It's just that I have a body.
Right.
And I happen to be wearing something that you are sexualizing right now.
Totally.
Not me.
I think it's also hard because, again, there's a spectrum to everything, right? You can't really say, making blanket statements is really difficult because there's exceptions to like everything you could possibly say. Sure. And people can point at those and say, well, you're wrong in this scenario. Even though what you're saying could be the right move for 99.9% of the time, they'll still point to the one time where you're not right.
Right.
I got to ask, where do you, as far as like news, just because this is a huge problem in America, everyone says there's fake news, which there is everywhere.
Oh,
and I think all the major ones, there's a lot of stuff that's not right. How do you know obviously there's some things that are just pure fact, but where do you get news from? What are news sources that you would suggest or that you would recommend as trustworthy? Okay,
so I still really like NPR. I know there's some were concerned there's a little bias there, but they're actually one of the least biased that I find. I don't go to one in particular because a lot of what I deal with is laws and bills. I get a headline, I get the information, and then I check multiple sites. I will read the articles, even that Fox puts out. I will read 3 or 4 or 5 articles, and then I will go out to whatever .gov site has the bill, and I will look through the bill. Will it all make sense to me? Not always, but I always try to sort of cross-reference those things so that what I'm bringing is as factual as it can be for me. Right. But I really like, the Associated Press. I really like, I don't do Washington Post a whole lot anymore. They've really kind of gotten messy. CNN's got really messy. All of those are just really messy. Even New York Times can be really messy. All trying to get likes, clicks, and views. That's what it comes down to. So for me, my best advice is always multiple articles. Sometimes those smaller local papers like the Houston Chronicle, I believe it is, like they'll have just more, I don't know, a little less bias because they're not backed by big money.
Totally. Yeah.
And I really like NPR. Some might argue that that's not a great one, but they've always seemed pretty unbiased, and they always link you to the bills, so I can go to the bill directly and read it for myself to understand what's happening. When it comes to human interest stories, I comb everything I can. I will check if it is a person that exists on Facebook, Twitter, whatever. I'm going to look at their social media. I'm going to try to figure out, who is this person I'm talking about? Can I validate that this is true? And then I go through it. But, a lot of the human interest stories you can kind of take from wherever, because they're all going to be a similar version of the other ones.
Yeah.
But the best thing I can ever advise to people is check multiple sources. And unlike a lot of people, I do look at stuff that's conservative leading because I want to see what their argument is so that I can speak against that, so I can speak to that, so I can prepare myself for the arguments I'm going to get.
Yeah, well, you don't want to be brainwashed by the other side either, right? There's both ends of the spectrum. Nobody's on either end of the spectrum. Right. Some people seem to be at the very edge, but there's always more you can do. Yeah. You got to figure out where you feel comfortable. And sometimes that's siding, with Republicans on one issue versus siding with Democrats on another, and then figuring out, well, I can't have my ideal person make these decisions for me. So I have to pick what I think is the better option, which I think is a big thing where people choose not to because they say, well, I'm choosing between, like that old South Park episode, was it a douche and a turd sandwich? You have to like,
Yeah.
right? They like have to pick which one and they're both horrible. Well, it still matters which one you pick. Let's get to our second song break. Unless you want to make a quick
I was
point.
going to say, and you can always go to places like C-SPAN for video evidence if you're looking for actually
What's
what.
C-SPAN? I don't
So
know what
it's they typically are the ones who will post the recordings of like legislative branches.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So that's where you can go to find actual footage. So you're not getting edited footage, I always try to find the source. That's the biggest advice. Always look for the source of the footage, so that you can watch it for yourself to make sure it hasn't been manipulated.
Yeah.
And Under the Desk News, which is a TikTok channel, is actually really great. I think it's they is their pronouns. They work very hard to bring unbiased information, and they work, directly with a lot of media sources. So
yeah.
they're not a mainstream media, but they're really informative.
Well, I mean, it's like I said, with anybody can have a platform, and that's one of the things that makes it really tough because any one of these people could also change their agenda at some point in time. Maybe all of a sudden somebody offered them a dollar amount that was too much, or whatever. But it's like people aren't realistically going to go and research everything in depth. They're just not going to, right? So they're going to listen to whatever source that they trust. Hopefully it's more than one source that they check on these things. But I think one thing is people just need to stop taking everything as automatic fact, right? Even if they listen to you and they believe you,
please
they
question.
They should go, okay, well, Mandy said this. I trust her judgment and what she said on it, but I did hear it from Mandy. I didn't hear it from anywhere else. That's where I heard it from. And just always keep that grain of salt in your mind of you heard it through a source that you trust, not directly.
And even though I try to be as unbiased, but I'm still biased. I'm still very much on the left, and I acknowledge
Well, everyone
that.
makes mistakes, right? You don't have a whole news team that's looking into everything to fact check literally everything. You're doing it. What if you're reading something one night and you just misread something? You were tired. It's just an honest mistake, right? And you don't necessarily know that till somebody points it out. Things happen. All I'm saying is like, not everyone's going to look at everything in depth. If you care a lot about it, absolutely do that. But just try to look at the sources that you feel comfortable with and recognize that they're just humans too. There's nothing that is just out there that is all the facts right to you every day. Everyone wishes that exists, but it doesn't exist.
Right.
Let's talk goals a little bit. I mean, when you start posting online, it's not like you really have an idea of specifically where that's going to go. Because how could you know? It's such an evolving world that it's like, who knows what any of this is going to morph into in 5 years. Because if you looked 5 years ago, where would things be? None of us would have believed it, right? So you really can't project or predict it. But what do you want this to turn into for you long term?
So, it is a lot of luck. All of this, people ask all the time, how did you grow your account? It's luck. You get lucky because the algorithms don't give you have no control, right?
You can set yourself up to be more lucky.
Yes. but you especially with like TikTok, they can just out of nowhere, major creators will suddenly be getting 800 views. It is a wild ride. So for me, I've always stayed very humble to like, we're just gonna take us a day at a time. But now that I've been doing it 3 years, I really want to, as I said, I'm trying to align my day job with my passion. And I'm interviewing with some nonprofits, hoping those go somewhere. I'm working with a group that works with the vice president's office. I'm on multiple lists with the vice president's office that I didn't know about until I started getting weird emails thinking these are fake, and then realizing, no, I've been vetted. I'm on their list.
Cool.
So, I get asked every day, you should run for office. I don't want to. I don't, maybe it's imposter syndrome. I look at some of the people in office. I'm like, I'm definitely more intelligent than they are. However, I think I can do more good being more of a support staff, right? Like working with campaigns, working with politicians, working on, using my social media platform to continue to communicate to people that otherwise may not hear the information or understand the information. So for the foreseeable future, it's continuing what I'm doing on social media, but also aligning my day job with something in nonprofit. Long term, I really want to work either in sort of lobbying or with nonprofits higher up to help affect policy change without running for office.
Yeah, see this, like, and I'm the vice chair of the Parks and Waterways Commission, so I'm like as low on the political pole as as possible. And I've thought about like running for city council. People have asked me and stuff because I've been in this town forever and I own a business and stuff, so it would make sense. But even just reading like what you're agreeing to, it's just like putting handcuffs on what you can and can't say. And I think Trump's the worst thing that ever happened in this country. Well, one of the worst things. I'm sure you can find an example that's horrible. But anyways, the one thing that it really, like, him coming to power really solidified in my mind is that you don't actually have to be a politician to be the most influential person and have the most affect the most change.
Right.
He did it in a horrible way.
Yeah.
But he just showed that really, even without being elected, he could influence a ridiculous amount of people. And in fact, if you're not elected, you don't have those handcuffs on. You can then kind of like do things the way that you actually want
Right.
to do without having to follow the policy of this party or whatever the position is.
Or have
whatever
to be in the
limitation
target
is.
of, you end up becoming targeted by the opposition.
Totally.
And anything that you've ever done becomes public knowledge. And I'm not saying I have a whole lot of dark skeletons, but there's just things
Everybody does.
I don't need to have platformed.
But the bigger you grow, the more likely that's going to happen.
Sure.
You piss off one person who has
yeah.
that agenda and they'll find something.
Right. Well, I'm actually dealing with sort of a stalker situation now, oddly enough. It's a woman. I'm positive it's a woman who thinks I'm in a relationship with another influencer because we were on a live together. Like, because we just live stream, and we're across the country, across the world, doesn't matter. There is no relationship. If you're listening, there's no relationship. But she started leaving really creepy messages, like comments on my videos. And then as soon as I delete them, she deletes the account and then comes back with another one. The only reason I know is that her writing follows the same cadence. She keeps saying similar things. But it's really funny because she's one of those people, like it's like a little microcosm of what can happen when people fixate on you in this sort of parasocial relationship. And I'm just like, she is completely convinced that I have stolen a man that doesn't even know who she is.
Sure.
And I'm like, no, you can have him. I don't think he knows who you are, but have him.
Well, yeah. So that brings up the conversation of personal life is really difficult when you become a person online, right? And I'm not saying you're like the biggest person in the world. No. I'm not the biggest person in the world, whatever. But even when you get to a space of what either of us are at, all of a sudden you have to be way more aware of what you're doing online, because for one, you expect to reach a much larger audience in the future. Yeah. So you're like kind of watching what you're doing, but it's hard to know like what relationships are being affected in what way because of that outside of just how you know that person. Also, with what you do that you have 1 million people to respond to literally at all times. So thanks for responding to me right away. That was dope.
Yeah.
But like you have 1 million of these. It's really hard to take your phone knowing there's things to do and put it away.
Oh yeah.
How do you have like rules with yourself of like, it's not until after 9 a.m. coffee that I check? Like, how do you keep that in control?
I have ADHD, so it's like one of those things where it's like I can hyper focus really fast and suddenly I'm on my phone and 5 hours has gone by and I'm like, what just happened? Yeah. Especially if I get on a story. I have a lot of my messages filtered. So in our case, there was a connection made through Molly, but a lot of times things will go to a filtered folder. So they go to like the first filtered and then they go to the hidden. And the hidden means that they've put something and then there's probably either inappropriate or concerning or whatever. I only allow myself to check those maybe twice a week. Oh, okay. Sometimes I will miss things, like people that know me and it for whatever reason got booted there, and they're always very understanding. But I used to be more of a like, I'm just going to read everything. My notifications on TikTok are so behind because people send me messages every single day. And it's like, I just don't have the bandwidth for it. Yeah. People trauma dump. What I talk about is women's issues. I talk about pregnancy. I talk about aging. I talk about menopause. I talk about things that are very personal, especially when we talk about, sexual assault, things like that. People will trauma dump. They will send me a message telling me their most horrible experience without any warning. And as a survivor of sexual assault, it can be really, really hard for me when I don't expect that. So I sometimes will sort of not read a lot of my messages for fear of what I'm going to encounter. Yeah. So I let myself I have to be in the right mindset. And that took a couple years to learn that I don't have to respond to everyone.
Right. Yeah, and you don't have to fix every issue, right?
I don't have to fix every issue. I don't have to. And I mean, that's the best advice I give to a lot of people. You don't owe anyone a response. I know sometimes they will get real mad. Sometimes they will get straight up crazy, and they will make even videos talking about this creator never responded. Once you get to a certain point, like my goal, short-term goal is obviously to get to that 500K on TikTok, to get to the 100K on Instagram, to like hit some of these milestones. But after you get to a certain place, the amount of messages you get become, unless you have a team, and some people have teams, I just got me, it becomes really impossible to manage. So my advice to other people who are starting to grow or have recently grown or get a large following suddenly is you don't owe anybody anything you don't have to give.
Sure.
Because the minute you start feeling you are obligated to give them this stuff, you will have nothing left for yourself. And the same with your private life, as you were talking about.
Yeah.
I'm really kind of hush-hush about my private. Like, people know I'm a mom, they know I'm whatever.
Yeah.
But I have gotten to know people off the app that I've met through the app that are always like, wow, there's a lot more to you than I thought. Like, there's a spicy side, because I make a lot of dirty jokes. I'm a child. And I'll be like, they're like, I didn't know Potty Mouth Pollyanna had that in her. I'll be like, that's because I'm Mandy. The internet gets Potty Mouth Pollyanna. The internet gets what I give them.
Sure.
But I'm a whole other person offline. And if I give everything to them, then what's left for me? What's left for the people in my life? I can only imagine, like, if you're dating someone, right? And every picture you send them, you also post online. Every message you send them, you talk about online. You leave nothing for the people in your life.
Right.
And I've seen that happen, and I've seen relationships fail, and I've seen friendships, break up because people don't keep that boundary. And I've always kept that boundary. Like, I've always said my credibility is really important to me. I'm not going to compromise who I am. And at the end of the day, if I'm not, one of the best compliments I get from anyone who's ever met me from off the app is, you are exactly who I think you are from watching you on the app.
Oh, cool.
Because I've met some people on the app
they play a character.
They are really nice, but they're total assholes in real life.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
you're just like, oh, I don't like you. Or they've let the fame go to their head or whatever.
Yeah, they got jaded.
Whereas people are like, you're who I expected you to be.
Yeah.
And that's a compliment, because at the end of the day, I have to live with myself.
Right.
And at the end of the day, being someone else completely online than who you are in real life is just not how I want to live.
Well, it's hard to keep up the facade anyways, right?
Yeah.
If you're just genuine, that's just how you feel all the time. Sometimes you don't share 100% of it, but still everything you do share is genuine.
Authentic, yeah. And those are my rules, I guess, to your question. Like, those are sort of my rules. Like, do I limit time? Some days. Like, for me, getting a day job right now, because this has been the hardest for me, is like, I just get hyper focused on content or hyper focused on something, and then other stuff doesn't get done because I don't have like a structured day.
Yeah.
But like now today, I know that I have that appointment with Molly tomorrow. So I'm like, in case that results in things, me looking strange for a bit, I have to make content this afternoon that has to be done so that I can have a couple of days where I'm not making content, if that's the case.
Yeah.
Like, so for me, structure is really good because it's just my ADHD. So I am looking forward to finding a day job so that I have like that break.
Yeah.
Because then I'm not as at the mercy of my phone as much.
Sure.
But for the most part, I try to plan non-phone activities. Like, I'm an amateur photographer. I love taking pictures. So, this winter has kind of sucked for winter photography because we just haven't had any real snow or any real weather for it. But if I can get outside and take pictures, if I can, maybe binge something even on Netflix, whatever, that just takes me out of it for a bit, because some people live their whole life with their head in the sand and the blinders on, and they aren't aware the world is burning around them. I'm aware of it all the time.
Yeah, and finding a middle ground where sometimes you can let it not be affecting your, you know what I mean? Because
it's really hard sometimes.
Me and my partner Mary, we were in Mexico, and in Mexico City, neither of us really liked it. And we were walking down the sidewalk, and part of it was there's all these homeless people, all these beggars everywhere, and it sucks.
Yeah.
It's so like it bothered me where I'm like, I'm just an American.
We don't see that here.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm walking by, like I'm not going to give money to everybody. Like, that's not realistic. But it's hard for me to enjoy myself right now knowing how much pain is right in front of me, right? And so it's a different example, but when you come to social media, when you're working on something like that, it's like, you know that the more you put in, the more change you can affect, and there isn't a 40-hour like limit set by the corporation you work for, right? It's just you. But at some point, you have to call it and say, okay, what time do I set aside for me so that way I even have the energy to continue to do this?
Right.
Because otherwise you're going to get burnt out.
And it's about having a
fast.
support system too that recognizes the signs. So like I have friends who will tell me straight up, I can tell it's because everything I talk about is very emotional. It's it's hard, especially when I'm talking about sexual assault cases, when I'm talking about children who are pregnant and being forced to give birth and probably will die. You know, all of that really can get to me. I'm an empath. So I know everyone says they're an empath. I legitimately am. Like I feel everything to an extreme, and they can tell when it starts to get to me because I'm potty mouth Pollyanna for a reason. I say fuck all the time, but I am a Pollyanna. I am hopelessly optimistic to a point, to my own fault sometimes. Even when I see the world burning, I want to believe it's going to change. But there are times it gets to be too much. And those people in my life, that support system, will be the ones to say, hey, I think you maybe should and of course I get stubborn. I'm like, no, I'm fine. But they're never wrong.
Right.
Because they can just see a shift in my tone, a shift in my energy, a shift in my personality when my videos become less empathetic and more like, why the fuck are we doing this? Like, that's where I get to be like, for the love of all, like, we need to fix this now. Like I start to lose like that hope. And as soon as I do, then my viewers do. And,
totally.
And I try not to do that. So that is incredibly important. But to your point too about Mexico City, like I always tell people where we live is a very isolated area. We live in a really unrealistic area compared to most of the world. When I worked in Atlanta last year, like that, or 2022, that was so eye-opening to me.
Way
just
different
the homeless population. Also, my first time experiencing cockroaches, don't recommend.
Same actually for Atlanta.
But like it was so horrifying to me because my heart broke because I wanted to help and I wanted to fix, and I knew I'm at the mercy of the world that we're in. Like I can't, like you said, you can't give everybody money. We can't. It wasn't safe for me by myself to be walking around a city I didn't know, trying to help anybody.
Right.
And it's heartbreaking to see how many people are struggling and how we have the wealth to fix it, but we don't, you know? And it's just, I can't ever really explain to people growing up in this area just how, and this, I do attribute this to a lot of the people who don't acknowledge the problems in the world. They've never left this area. I'm like, we have a homeless population. You don't see it, even like you see it in Minneapolis. You just don't. It's a very weird, isolated, almost like 10 years behind the times kind of place because you just don't get exposed to it in the same way you do other places.
Yeah, but that's what I try to explain to people when they get combative against the opposition, you know, or they make them the opposition. They're just other people. They're misinformed or they believe something different, but they're still people. But they go, how could you possibly not agree with me? It's like, well, did you live their life? They may have like lived a totally different life. And not only that, but like talk about age groups too, right? Like the younger generation where we're all like gender fluid, who cares? Whatever, do your thing. Like why
it doesn't affect me at all.
No. But the older generation, right? People in their 60s, they've never known anybody in their life that's like that.
Yeah.
So it makes it, you know what I mean? It's the same way like when I was growing up, and I'm 33, but even when I was growing up, I remember when the first boy in my school came out as gay, everyone talked about it because it was so strange. It was so whatever. And that's not even that long ago.
Yeah.
And now kids, like, it's become way more normalized, right? But so it's hard to hold somebody who's in that generation or from that area or whatever and expect them to understand because they haven't experienced these things.
Yeah, I have a trans family member to protect their anonymity. I won't say how they're related to me, but I have a trans family member. And another family member that I'm close with has a really hard time not using their preferred name and pronouns. And they want to, but they also don't understand that you have to make the effort, you know? So like I'm constantly correcting them and I know their heart's in the right place, but to them, it just doesn't really make, they've said it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't have to.
Right.
It doesn't have to make sense to you.
So.
It's no different than my given name is Amanda, but everybody calls me Mandy.
Right.
if I started telling you I want to be called Amanda, it's going to take you a minute, but you're going to respect it. You're getting hung up on something that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, just respect what they want, and everyone feels safe, and it doesn't hurt anybody.
Totally. Yeah. I think because I've had that conversation with a lot of people about the pronoun thing. But really, I think the big part of it is if you're actually genuinely trying to be an ally, that's enough. You can't fault people for making a mistake when they're trying to be on your side. And I don't think there's that many people that are that extreme that they want to have everyone be their enemy. They want, if they recognize that you're trying, that's enough. You'll get better at it over time anyway. You know what I mean? But that's all you got to do is you just got to try. Most of these people are very accepting. Let's have one positive story. When you do something that you really care about for a living, something you're passionate about, you get to have a lot of unique experiences, such as potentially maybe meeting Kamala Harris. That would be incredible. I've gotten to have a lot of them, traveling all over, interviewing a bunch of different people. What's a story of an experience you had that you're really grateful for, but it only happened because you chose this path?
Oh, gosh. I feel like there's this one when somebody asks you your favorite book and you're like, I've never read a book in my life. There have been a lot of really wonderful experiences, people I've gotten to meet. I want to say that for me, I did help a woman whose daughter had been sexually assaulted and became pregnant. They live in one of the states where access is nearly nothing. Like there is just no access, but they desperately didn't know where to go.
Right.
And through, obviously I want to keep it private, but through messages and encrypted messages, I was able to get her some resources. So she was able to get medication to help her 15-year-old daughter address that. And it wasn't a really involved, because you can't be. You have to be so careful in these states where it's illegal. So it was, it was a very light interaction, but one that had a profound impact. And a few weeks after a couple messages back and forth through an encrypted messaging app, hadn't heard anything. And then she eventually did reach out to let me know that everything had worked out.
Yeah.
And she is who I think about. And I get a lot of questions. Like I always have those resources available on my page through my link tree so that people can find those resources, because for those who don't know, it is still legal in all 50 states to get abortion medication. So we're waiting. In June, we'll hear from the Supreme Court, and that could change. So if there's anything people can do right now, it's get that stuff, because it's something people don't know is you can get it preemptively. So I always, because you have to be careful the language you use on social media, because they will suppress things that if you say, like, you can't say rape, you can't say, you have to be really careful. So we all talk in code, right? So I call it an uterine eviction kit, which is essentially the abortion bills. And there's access to that is on a sliding scale for affordability, because honestly, the people who need it most usually can't afford to get it. So I always keep those things available, but it is helping someone like that who found themselves in what is one of the hardest, most difficult situations you can ever face. Who's and the father, not the person who assaulted her. The dad in the situation. This was the mom who reached out to me. The dad is against. The dad didn't know.
Oh wow. Okay.
But to force a 15-year-old to give birth, you can't. So it was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had, and I obviously rarely talk about it because I never ever want to give that I never want to betray anyone. But it is one of the stories that keeps me going. It is stories like that. Even if it was just that she went to my webpage and found the link, knowing I was an ally, knowing I was supportive, knowing that I was going to provide that information in a safe environment, that she could get that information and she could take care of her daughter and protect her daughter in a way that she didn't know what she could do because she's in one of the states where it's not legal to go to a doctor and get this done, keeps me going. And I know to people listening, it might not be a positive story to you. You may think that's horrible. But for me, because sometimes I feel like I'm just screaming in the void, it showed that I'm impacting people and they feel they can trust me and they can come to me and I'm a resource.
Well, and getting past the imposter syndrome of like, why am I the person you're asking? But recognizing that a lot of these people don't know who to ask. And if you can be the right person for them, like just do your best in that situation. You don't have to have a bunch of knowledge on this thing. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be whatever. But by putting positivity out into the world in that way and doing what you can and telling them, hey, I'm a white woman in Wisconsin. I have a limited scope of what I know from the resources, the life I've lived, the resources I have available, but this is what I believe. And if I can help you, great. You know what I mean? It's like people, I think, are so afraid of not being the right, like not saying everything completely right, which you're never going to be 100% right anyways.
Right.
You know what I mean? That they just don't speak up at all because they're like, well, maybe I don't know enough about the subject. It's like, well, no, but your voice does still matter. Yeah. So you should definitely still speak up. So if people are going to speak up, and if they want to send you a message, I know, again, like they have to filter through some things. And I think people do understand when they see somebody who has like a presence online that realistically, typically the higher that number is, the more messages they're getting. So I think most people understand that. And
it's weird because I hear a lot of people get like really awful. I don't actually get nearly the like hate mail.
I'm surprised you don't.
I am too, because I will get it from men every so often. Like it's mostly men. I get really sad when it's women because it's just like, why?
Right.
It's like,
you're like, I'm on your team.
I've always been a very pro woman. I was never that girl. I was never going to be the mean girl because I was always like, we should be each other's allies because the biggest power that the patriarchy has is convincing women that they need to compete with each other. Yeah. Because as long as we're fighting with each other, they're allowed to control and do what they want.
That's the case with anybody in power. Look at how wealthy people want to keep people poor. They want to make us all argue with each other. I remember when Walker was in office and they were getting rid of the healthcare for like teachers and stuff. And I remember like getting rid of unions, and the rhetoric they were pushing was, you shouldn't have these other people. They're getting all of this from you, from tax money that's paying for their retirement, paying for these things. They shouldn't have those things. But by looking at it that way, they say they shouldn't have those things because you don't have those things.
Yeah.
However, the problem is if those things are lost, if those people no longer have them, now you have no leverage to get them either.
Right.
Why are you arguing amongst each other? Those aren't the bad people.
Right.
The bad people are convincing you that they're the bad people. Like, take your blinders off.
It's the same with like the student loan forgiveness, right?
Totally. Yeah.
This whole idea that it was only the left that were going to have their loans forgiven. No, there were plenty of Republicans that were going to get their loans forgiven, but they painted it as such a like it's you're a freeloader. I'm like, if you had any idea how much I have paid on my loans, I have paid my loans off in interest in and of itself.
But I mean, there's people that think that electric vehicles are going to be the next thing, which means that people are going to come up to your driveway and take your car. Like, I mean, it's like, that's not going to happen. But some of these news sources, and again, it's hard to tell them, it's hard to like place so much judgment on them because really it's the people doing the convincing that are the problem.
Well, and that's something that Republicans are really good at.
Exactly.
Their optics, their messaging is because they will say something that is completely ridiculous. Like, for example, the afterbirth abortions. That's murder. It's not a thing. It's never been a thing. No woman, no doctor, nobody is saying, I was going to talk like I'm online. Like let's unalive. No, let's kill this baby because she doesn't want it and she just gave birth. Or 10 minutes before giving birth while she's having an abortion. That's not real. But they have said it now consistently and long enough that people believe it.
Right.
And it's sad because it's not real. And they'll be like, yeah, it is. Late-term abort. That's not a medical term. It's not a real thing.
Right.
And I get asked all the time, where do I stand on the cutoff? That's
a hard one.
What is my cutoff? I trust women. I trust people who could be pregnant. I trust doctors. The minute we put a cutoff, and Roe had a viability clause. Like, in theory, viability is the point when you would want to deliver, obviously not abort.
Right.
And that is the standard care. If it is at a point where that fetus is viable, you're going to try to deliver the fetus and then, take care of the patient if that was necessary or that was necessary for the fetus. You're not having abortions at that point. It's induced labor.
Right.
I believe, and people will say, oh, you want to murder babies up until the 40th week. No, I don't. Mm-hmm. I just don't think women are monsters.
Right. Yeah.
There is no evidence of any singular woman or doctor who went along with it that terminated a pregnancy just for funsies at 30 weeks, 35 weeks. any pregnancy that's being terminated, even after about the 12th week,
It's traumatic.
is a
too.
traumatic
Yeah.
and terrible experience. And
Right.
it's in the most dire situations anytime you get past 20 weeks. Like, it is the worst situations that no one wants to be in very wanted pregnancies.
Yeah.
And they paint women like these monsters, and these are mostly men, but other women painting women as monsters who are just like, I don't want to be pregnant. And so they want us to put a cutoff. Okay, so where's your cutoff? The minute you put a cutoff, and then somebody suddenly is going to die, or their fetus is not viable, it's not developing a brain, whatever, and it's a week after that cutoff, now you're going to force that person to go through the most
Right.
traumatic experience of their life if they survive it.
Yeah.
So to me, it's about trusting that doctors are not monsters, and if we're wrong, and suddenly those things start happening, they'll be prosecuted,
Yeah.
and then the laws can be changed. But to say 15 weeks, to say, because I know Wisconsin Republicans are now trying to say we're going to put it on the ballot,
Yeah.
but not in a way that's, hey, we're going to protect access.
Right.
Do you want it to be 12 weeks? Or 6 weeks. They want to give
Right.
you I don't know if those are the weeks, but they want to
Yeah,
give you
right.
two awful options and make you pick from the two awful options versus an option that actually protects women's and those who can be pregnant's lives.
Yeah.
But for me, the cutoff has always been, I trust pregnant people to make, and pregnant people makes people really mad online, by the way. If
Yeah.
I don't say pregnant women, because they get all in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't like when I say pregnant people. I'm like, women are people too.
Yeah.
I trust pregnant people and their doctors to do what is right, because there is no evidence to suggest that they're not.
Well, and the thing is, there will be especially in this case, the fact that there's literally no evidence is like miraculously they're doing the right things. But there will be somebody, if you're looking, we got 300 to 400 million people in America alone. There will be somebody that does the wrong thing that like you could point at as an example and say, see what's happening. But you can't look at an individual situation like that.
Right.
And it's hard to pick a line on any law
Yeah.
because there's going to be exceptions to all of it.
Right.
That's why you have to, the politicians have to try to figure out a way to write a law that is what's best for people as a whole, and then try to have it set up in a way where anything that doesn't fit that is an exception, we can take those on a case by case.
While Roe wasn't perfect and it was built on privacy, not
Right.
abortion, which is where it became a weaker law,
Yeah.
Roe had a viability expectation. Like if it was viable, that you were supposed to try to obviously deliver that fetus. And it had sort of cutoffs.
Yeah.
But it wasn't good enough for the extremists. And the worst thing they ever did was overturn it on both sides. Because now, obviously on the left, they're fighting desperately to protect people's lives because it didn't get codified, it got overturned. They can't, people like me and even me, like, I don't give you any more money until you do something, because this
Right.
is crazy. This should never have happened. But to the right and the pro-forced birth movement and all of that, they recently came out with, at the anniversary of Dobbs, and this is so wild, that they, hey, I haven't seen as many abortions stopped as they hoped. They aren't going to get the donations now because it was like the dog chasing the car, caught
Right.
the car, doesn't know what to do with it. So they keep now just trying to push. Now they're going back on their word, saying, which we always said they would. Now they want a federal ban because states like Michigan, Minnesota and stuff are protecting it. And the pro-forced birth movement said, we don't know how to solve for the women with wanted pregnancies who are being forced to stay pregnant or lose their lives. They are literally looking at women dying as an optic, as something to solve for, rather than say, hey, we might have been wrong on this. This is actually harming a lot of pregnant women.
Right.
And so it's crazy to me that they finally got what they wanted. And now they're like, oh, but now we have to solve for the fact that, oh yeah, like they said it would, it's causing people to lose their lives or to nearly lose their lives or to become sterilized or, have to birth a fetus that's going to suffer and die because of these laws.
Yeah.
Because legislators should not be practicing medicine.
Well, no, but like I said, it's on the outside looking in, it's easy to say this is the solution. Mm-hmm. But me and my limited understanding of politics being involved in things with the city, there's a lot that goes into that. That's why like overturning it makes it such a huge can of worms to try to like put anything new in place.
Right.
Because there's so many variables, and no matter what you choose, it's going to be wrong for some people. So you have to try to like navigate that. And then not only that, it has to go through all these different levels. It has to go state there. Like there's a lot that goes into it.
And there's so much money that's coming in from specifically like evangelical lifers, where like you see states like Texas have lost their damn mind. Because now they're making laws. They have sanctuary cities where if you get pulled over traveling through them and they suspect that you're going out of state to get an abortion, they can hold you for trafficking. They're trying to stop interstate travel. They've just passed where if you go to the ER and say I'm 7 months pregnant and I'm having preeclampsia, I'm bleeding, it's really bad, and they're like, there's still a fetal heartbeat, but it's clear that you are going to die before you can give birth. An abortion will save your life. They don't have to give you an abortion now. And the Supreme Court just sided with Idaho on that, and now they're going to hear that and they'll rule on it. But they've already temporarily sided with Idaho. I don't think they're going to change the ruling on it. Yeah. Texas has, there's a 6 weeks. There's no exceptions. Like, it is barbaric. I mean, imagine you're just, and it keeps getting more. Like It was like states' rights. But it's just, they keep adding to it. They're like, well, we're going to make it even harder for you to get this. We're going to make sure you can't. And I'm like, why? But like I said, the senator out of Idaho said it plain as day. Well, all these abortions lead to a decline in birth rate and workforce. Anyone who thinks it was about saving babies haven't been paying attention. They just want cheap labor and the white majority.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. Let's give one more shout out where people can find you on all the different platforms, so that way they can continue to pay attention and see what's happening. They can get involved in things if they wanted to be involved in any of these movements or any of the other nonprofits that you're involved with. How can they find you? So
you're going to find me at Potty Mouth Pollyanna, all one word. You'll find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, a little bit of Twitter, but really Instagram and TikTok are where you're going to find me. I do have links within my bio that will lead you to all kinds of great organizations that can provide you with information, medication, just a plethora of things in my link tree. And, I do have my messages open. So if there are ever questions, as much as I said I avoid them, I do check them periodically. Yeah. Maybe one day I'll have people and they can come through them. But, if you ever have questions, and you can always get involved, always check your local Planned Parenthoods. They're always looking for clinic defenders and people who can support. And yay, Wisconsin, for currently being able to reopen some of their clinics who can provide abortion services while they continue to try to litigate a law that was made prior to women even being able to vote. So.
Yeah. Well, and realistically, I understand when people say they don't want to vote for the president because their vote doesn't get it. It doesn't matter. I don't agree, but I understand. But locally, you can make a huge difference. Yeah.
And you should always look for local. Like, even if maybe you're not comfortable advocating for abortion, there are women's shelters that can always use support. There, you can make donations. You can contribute to helping women, helping girls, helping trans, non-binary people in all communities. And there's always opportunities. And that's how we really make change, is looking at it at the micro level and looking at it locally.
And you don't have to be anything specific. That's what a lot of people think. They need to be somewhat a certain qualification. No, you don't. And actually, it's good if you don't sometimes. That's why it's a whole committee of people making the decision. Mm-hmm. We want to have as diverse of a committee as possible, so that way we see the perspective of everybody that lives there. So don't let that hold you back either. Obviously, there's more, like, we could go talk about this forever about how underprivileged people also don't have the time, money, and resources to go volunteer. Like, there's a lot. We talk forever about it. But still, I would say, I know from just being involved in Eau Claire that you don't have to have any specific qualifications for anything. A lot of these things are very low commitment that can get you your foot in the door to be able to make a difference. It's one meeting a month for the 21 commissions we have in Eau Claire. And if you miss them periodically, it's okay. Mm-hmm. So if you want to get involved in some kind of way, start small, and then you can see where you can go from there. But you absolutely can make a difference.
Absolutely.
thank you so
But
much
yeah.
for coming over here and letting me be the first one to interview you long form. It was a
Well,
pleasure.
thank you. And I appreciate you. Your questions were great. And I've really enjoyed discussing this. And again, I am always here as a resource for anyone who has questions and anyone can be a voice, whether it's just to the people that you know or like me, an accidental influencer online who just happened to have a lot to say, and it turns out people wanted to hear it. So
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Passion Pod. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We'll see you soon.